moderator, but since the first thing we would do is a vote, I thought it'd just be good to review the section 7-6 of the Connecticut General Statute, so eligibility to vote. So if anyone has any questions, and I'm going to skip a little bit here to make it quicker. At any town meeting, any person who is an elector of such town may vote. So if you're a registered voter in Easton, you can vote. If you're not a registered voter in Easton, then you can vote if you're a citizen of the United States, 18 years or older, and jointly or severally is liable to the town for taxes assessed against him on an assessment of not less than $1,000 on the last completed grand list of such town. So you can vote if you're a registered voter and if in Easton, and if you're not, if you're a U.S. citizen, 18 or older, and have $1,000 of property on the grand list, then you can also vote. Okay, so with that, are there any nominations for a moderator? Yes. Is there a second?
A second.
Are there any other nominations? Any nominations? Okay. All in favor of Tom Herman, say aye. Aye. Tom, call your.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for taking time out of your evening tonight to participate in town meeting. As you well know, we have one question before this body, and we are going to endeavor to follow Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, to the best of our ability, both yours and mine. So, before we begin any debate, would someone like to make a motion?
Point of order.
Sorry, please state your point of order.
Point of order. The town clerk has to read the warning.
Okay, the town clerk can read the warning. It will be reiterated when a motion is made, but would the town clerk be so kind as to read the warning?
Warning is hereby given of a special town meeting to be held within and for the town of Easton on Monday, September 24, 2018, 7 p.m. at the Samuel Staples Elementary School, 515 Morehouse Road, Easton. 2. Number 1, discuss and possible action on a proposed ordinance submitted by petition as follows. The town shall not acquire any real property by sale, lease, or otherwise, nor shall it dispose of any real property owned by the town for sale, lease, or otherwise, without the proper approval of the town meeting, its legislative body. Except this ordinance shall not apply to real property with a fair market value of less than $10,000, nor to lease of duration of 1 year or less, or of total lease payments totaling less than $10,000, nor to any real property acquired by tax foreclosure. Number 2, adjournment, per order of the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you very much. Before we call for a motion, would someone like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Mr. Smith, thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Is there someone present who would like to make a motion?
Make a motion to
Please rise, state your name, go to the microphone. Thank you.
I'm Jeff Becker, 5 Hill Road. Make a motion for Peter Daisy to present.
Second.
We have nothing to present until we have made a motion. We need to make a motion for something for discussion, so if you'd like to make a motion, I'd be happy to hear it. The motion is embodied in the warning notice that was just read.
Not sure I understand your question.
We're here to address a proposed ordinance. In order to begin the discussion, I am calling for a motion to be ensured that the motion is made and seconded so that we can then begin debate. So would you like to make the motion?
I'd like to make a motion that Peter Dacey will present the petition text as it's written. Do I need to actually read it?
If Peter Dacey would like to make the motion and articulate that motion, as it was indicated in the warning, that's fine too. But then would Peter Dacey like to make a motion? We include the person who makes the motion gets the floor first. So if Peter Dacey would like to make a motion and articulate it, then we would have the floor first.
I'd like to make a motion regarding the ordinance as presented.
Could you please do your articulate?
Absolutely. This is the motion petition: the town shall not acquire any real property by sale, lease, or otherwise, nor shall it dispose of any real property owned by the town by sale, lease, or otherwise, without the prior approval of the town meeting, its legislative body. Except this ordinance shall not apply to real property with a fair market value of less than $10,000, nor to leases of duration of 1 year or less, or total lease payments totaling less than $10,000, or to any real property acquired by tax or foreclosure.
Thank you very much. Is there a second to this motion? Noted. Thank you. Peter, as maker of the motion, you are allowed to discuss the debate first. In the interest of time, can you give us an idea of how long you might want to spend?
Yes, I put together a presentation that probably runs about 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay. What I will decide then is that allow you 10 to 15 minutes. I will then allow the Board of Selectmen, who call the meeting and are responsible for administering the ordinance, to respond. Their time will be in total an equivalent amount that we have provided you. And then by a show of hands, how many people are interested in speaking tonight? Okay, I don't see really more than maybe 10 or 12. Well, we'll try to limit our conversation and comments to 3 minutes. The floor is yours, Mr. Dacey.
Good evening, town meeting. My name is Peter Dacey. I am a near lifetime resident of Easton, and it is my pleasure and honor to stand before you tonight to fill you in on the ordinance so you may know what it is that you are voting on this evening. The nature of the ordinance speaks specifically to town land use regarding sale, lease, or anything along those lines in terms of uses. What we're here to discuss is the decision in terms of who has authority over decisions regarding town land use. As it currently stands, according to Connecticut's general statute, the decisions on these matters are held by the Board of Selectmen. General statute authorizes and demands, in fact, that a town meeting such as this one, that a public hearing is held, allowing an assembly like this one to occur in which people can give their comments and questions regarding any sort of decisions on town land use. However, that is the limitation of the statute in terms of authority granted to the citizenry. Otherwise, the final authority rests in the hand of the Board of Selectmen on these decisions. The reason that a new ordinance changing this final authority is so important is because it directly impacts the very nature, the very character of the town of Easton. I don't think I need to tell you that Easton's land is at the heart of its character. Land is central to its image and the way of life for all of us here is part of what we love about this town. And it is the decisions of town land use can impact that character. It can leave it alone, it can tweak it, or it can change it dramatically depending on what decisions are at hand. That's a decision that is best left to the citizens of the town itself. Any handful of people making such a decision may or may not make the best decisions over these proposed uses. We want to make sure that it's done right and it speaks to the town as a whole in terms of how we wish the town to use its land. The flyer handed out to you tonight included 2 wordings for this ordinance. The ordinance that was on the petition itself that circulated in the town, I now have up on the screen as well. And in basic terms, this ordinance calls for any, again, sale, leases, or other major uses of town land need to be authorized by town meeting as opposed to Board of Selectmen decision. That ordinance also includes a number of exemptions that are meant to remove this from applying to any minor situations. This ordinance is intended to apply only to major decisions in terms of land use. I want you to take special note of the fact that the petition as it was worded, the ordinance as it was worded in the petition, also spoke to the acquisition of property by the town, and it listed the exemptions item by item. That is why we're also proposing modification of this ordinance to improve it. The Board of Selectmen has helpfully given further thoughts and insight regarding this ordinance, and we want to serve the town as best as possible. And to that end, the new wording of the ordinance is what you also saw in the handout given out tonight and what we have up on the screen here. In short, there are only 2 simple modifications that have been made to the wording of this ordinance. The first is to remove acquisitions of land. The reason being is there is a broad consensus that that is already covered by other procedures in the town of Easton. This ordinance did not need to speak to it. It would be unnecessary, and so it's been removed. The other reason for adjustment here is rather than present an itemized list that there was some question of whether there might be some small aspects of land use decisions that still would fall through the cracks. What we've done now is we have made the ordinance apply precisely to the exact same exemptions detailed in this Connecticut state statute. The statute that demands public hearing for major land uses. So now anything that requires a public hearing would also go to town meeting and nothing more. So understand, these are small tweaks, not outright changes. But this way it applies simply to decisions made on current town land, and it would exempt everything that the state statute also requires. It's also very helpful to understand part of the reason that this ordinance makes sense is because it is not a new idea. In fact, Easton's neighbors that are similar to Easton, other towns, have very similar measures. Some, in fact, that are much more broad and powerful than what we're looking at tonight. Ours is kept simple because we don't need a sweeping measure by any stretch. You can see here the language of 3 nearby towns. There are other towns, many throughout other areas of Connecticut, that have this sort of measure involved. So, although the Connecticut statutes speak to allowing public hearing, many towns have also seen fit to have the citizens themselves also make the final decisions on land use in the town. So there's very good reason to have this ordinance, but we also want to make sure the ordinance is done right. And the Board of Selectmen have, again, helpfully given their thoughts regarding the language and the application of the ordinance, they presented concerns along the way. Good news is that these different sort of concerns are not an issue, and so I'm going to run through them tonight to allow you to know what kind of questions have been asked and what the answers are to those questions, so you will not have to worry about them and you can vote in an informed fashion. The first objection that was made is that this measure is redundant, specifically on the grounds of acquisitions. As we've just seen a little while ago, that's why we removed acquisitions from the ordinance. The redundancy is no longer here. So it made sense to not have it in here since it's already taken care of and it's been removed. The second objection brought forth was that this ordinance would be a burden on the town in terms of how it runs its everyday matters. There are many smaller leases and similar such land uses that are discussed by the selectmen on an everyday matter. The selectmen do a great service to us to handle these measures, and that's why the ordinance would not cover those. And you know they wouldn't cover those because the state statute that demands public hearing would be the exact same exemptions that govern that would be the same exemptions that govern this. We don't hold public hearings all the time on minor land uses, and that's why we wouldn't hold town meetings all the time on those same sorts of uses. It would be left instead only to major items that are required to go to public hearing by state statute. Along those same lines, we don't have to worry about any added costs through this ordinance. There's a thought that the ordinance would require additional time and expense for town meetings, but that is because, first, there was a misconception that this would apply often. As we just mentioned, it will not, so there will not be numerous town meetings that don't currently occur. In addition, even for the measures that are major ones and require a public hearing, even if the town sees fit to procedurally hold the public hearing and the town meeting separately, they can be held back to back. They can be announced in the same announcement. They can then be held public hearing, adjournment, and town meeting. So they can be held on the same day, all at once, do not require additional time. And it's, again, only for major matters, which are not frequent, but important to the town. So, you do not need to be concerned of an excess of expenses or the use of people's time. It's only going to be very narrowly applied. Additionally, this ordinance has given thought to whether this would create more government in the town. There's thoughts that it would be an additional layer of government. As we discussed before, we have to go to public hearing by state statute on these sorts of decisions anyway. By going to town meeting, all that adds is that the final authority on those decisions also rests in the town. That's not an added layer of government, it simply changes who makes the decision, and we still have to have an assembly on those decisions as it is. There was some thought as well that this might be some form of big government, but of course big government is about the government intruding supposedly on the wishes of the people. This ordinance serves to go in the exact opposite direction. This is about the people expressing and authorizing their will in where they live, in the town of Easton in this particular case. Similarly to the thoughts of the issue about the frequency of meetings, there was concern that this might be a question or a concern for people who would be interested in having leases or sales of Easton town land. People could be reluctant to work with the town, or entities that currently engage in many everyday matters, park and rec leasing fields, for example, suddenly make this much more difficult. Again, as I mentioned, this would not apply to everyday matters. Park and rec doesn't do public hearing for use of fields. If it doesn't go to public hearing, it wouldn't go to town meeting. So there's absolutely no concern about that side of addressing the certainty with other entities. As for larger issues, of course, there's going to be some thought for major decisions that the people are going to become involved, and that is what the surrounding towns of Easton do as well. Those towns do it. That's going to be the expectation of anyone who would work with any town, and that's all that would happen here. They don't need to worry about this being some untested lever of governance, because they know how it works in other towns as well. Another concern is that if these decisions were to go to town meeting, the attendance at town meeting wouldn't be strong enough to properly represent the town. There are town meetings that are not particularly well attended. That's for good reason. If the town meeting does not cover something of major interest or objection, it's going to join routine matters of business. But look around here tonight. There are a lot of people in this room. And that's because there's some great interest in the ordinance at hand. When this ordinance was first proposed in 2014, in a version that needed some tweaks, that town meeting drew over 400 citizens, as did the meeting on the 9/11 memorial that now sits in front of the town library. Clearly, the town of Easton comes to its town meetings when there are matters of interest that people care about. And that's what would happen with these issues as well. If there's no concern, then the town meeting wouldn't have major attendance because everyone's in agreement on what should happen. And when there's debate, the town meeting would allow that until a consensus is, or by vote is reached by majority. Following along those lines, in terms of attendance, there's a question of whether special interest groups might be able to take over a town meeting and impose their own will on the decisions made. Well, of course, as we just saw, when there is a major matter of interest in the town that goes to town meeting, attendance isn't a problem, and so people will be there. Some nebulous special interest group isn't going to be able to do much of anything in that setting. Even if somehow, in a town meeting that was not expected to be a contention, a group were to show up in numbers that might make a difference, there could be a call to have the decision held by machine vote, referendum, instead of being held at that very town meeting. So there are measures in place if somehow previously has not happened before, special interest group has come and tries to hijack a town meeting. So it might be theoretically possible, but that's not a concern, both because of the attendance you see here and because there are ways to deal with that. Don't let yourself be concerned by fears brought up of some phantom menace that you've never actually encountered before. And finally, there's an interesting objection regarding qualifications of the citizenry to make these sorts of decisions. As you can see on the comments up here, Mr. Dunsby had an understandable thought that people like to leave routine business to their representation in town. That's naturally true. It's why we have representation, so we don't have to bog down in everyday matters. But of course, this ordinance is not here to apply to everyday matters. When the matter is of importance, the people do wish to become involved, and they do wish to be informed when they become involved. That's what tonight's all about. Mr. Lester also had a thought that the average citizen might lack the expertise to be properly informed and make good decisions on these. And again, on routine matters that they don't normally involve themselves on, that might be the case, or it might not. I'm not sure about that. But when it comes to major decisions, the citizens of Easton care. They've cared in the past, they care in the future. That's why it makes sense to allow them to be here, to become informed, and make these decisions. In fact, when we have these meetings, or when we have any other prior discussions made on such matters, the Board of Selectmen would be a great conduit for being informed on these sorts of decisions. We often initially discuss the kinds of uses, land uses that would come up for a vote in town meeting, so they can help in becoming informed. And once we're informed, we can have our vote. So understand that this ordinance, applying specifically to major land use issues, and just major land use issues, on the surface, it can make sense to be worried about a number of different issues. The selectmen have wanted to make sure that this ordinance is done right and doesn't have a lot of flaws to it. You've seen the list of objections that they've made to the ordinance. You can see that those objections are not an issue. It's a tight measure, it's straightforward. Some of the objections have never been a concern, and some of them in past forms of the ordinance might have been a concern, and that's why we made sure to continue to adjust the ordinance on the basis of their thoughts and recommendations to make it the most precise ordinance it can be. One other interesting thing to note, given the feedback that the selectmen have given, is that, in a way, they've actually presented their own support for the ordinance. These quotes, which came from the same meeting that the other quotes have given with the objections tonight on the screen, address that. Mr. Lessler has made it clear, and I certainly agree, that major land use issues, we cited the property at South Park Avenue, which has pending decisions to be made on it, as vitally important to the town, and that it warrants public input and, most importantly, to get the decision right. Ms. Sadowski, or other selectmen, has noted a small group of people is not ideal for making those decisions if we want to get it right. Put those two pieces together, and it's very clear then who is the best body to make the decision on these, and that is the full body of people, not just a few selectmen or any other small group. So this ordinance would bring such decisions into the hands of the town citizens. So that is what the ordinance speaks to, and that's what the ordinance calls for. It simply takes final authority on major land use decisions and grants it to town meeting as the deciding body. And I want to speak to one other thing regarding this. The reason I'm up here speaking to you today is I'm not normally involved with these sorts of things. I'm an unaffiliated political member of the town. I was not involved in this ordinance when it was first discussed. In fact, it was only fairly recently that I learned about this ordinance in detail and found out about it. I'm here because the ordinance makes absolute sense to me. I am very fond of our American democracy. It is a powerful system of governance, and I love it even more with how it applies to Easton. We split our governance between a couple of bodies. What you see here tonight, this wonderful town meeting, allows every member of the town to express themselves, not just in word, but in authority when it matters most. But at the same time, we can trust in representation to take care of the matters we don't want to bog ourselves down in. That is precisely what representational democracy is all about and how it's supposed to work. And that's what this ordinance is here to provide us with. For the routine, for the simple leases, for the simple land uses, the selectmen are perfect for making those sorts of decisions. But for the major issues that would impact the very culture, feel, nature of the town of Easton, which is very much defined by its land, this ordinance reflects that it's important to get as much feedback and authority as possible. Make sure that it understands what the town citizens want as a whole, and give them the final authority on that decision. And so with that in mind, I want to speak finally to our selectmen here and say, with these objections that you noted and been helpful to provide now answered, I would like to ask, hoping that you believe in the power of our Eastern town government as much as I do, I challenge you to join the rest of us here tonight in voting yes to this ordinance and granting this very important power to the people of the town.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much.
If we can have the house lights back on, please.
Top button.
I indicated that the Board of Selectmen have an equivalent amount of time. Madam Clerk, did you have an indication of how many minutes or? 21 minutes. Thank you very much. Can you keep this within 21 minutes?
I think so. I'll use the 20 here. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. So, I oppose the proposed ordinance, and I encourage everyone here to oppose it as well. I believe that this will lead to less efficient government over time and higher taxes over time. My comments are addressed to the ordinance that was in the petition that the people signed. So right now, state law, I'll give my additional reasons and some of them. So right now, state law already provides for significant public input for the disposition of real property. The proponent stated previously that it's only up to the Board of Selectmen. That's actually not true. What the state statute requires is input from the Planning and Zoning Commission, the so-called 824 report. The Planning and Zoning Commission is the body in the town town, which is responsible for having the vision for what the town is supposed to look like as far as